Today's guest is Scott Belsky, founder of the social media channel for creatives called Behance. In 2006, Behance was acquired by Adobe, where Scott now serves as Chief Product Officer and EVP. Scott is also an active investor and advisor to companies like Pinterest, Uber, Sweetgreen, Carta, Cheddar, Flexport, Airtable, Periscope, and Braintrust.
There you go.
Scott's also a very accomplished author, having written 2 international best-selling books, Making Ideas Happen and The Messy Middle. It's where I usually live. So as I said, full disclosure, Scott is an angel investor in Braintrust. He has been incredibly helpful, helping us along our journey here. And Scott, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
No, thanks for having me. It's exciting to have this conversation.
Yeah. So Scott, let's start with your background. I mean, you've done a bunch of really cool stuff, both as operator and also like an executive at a fast growing company, as well as an investor. Maybe let's go into rewind machine. Like, how did you come to found Behance? What was the origin story there?
Yeah, I think as I look at the projects of my life, they've all been inspired by frustration. In the case of Behance, Behance was inspired by how frustrating it was to see my friends in the creative industry navigating their careers at the mercy of circumstance, being just so disorganized that their ideas oftentimes didn't, get the opportunity they deserved, or they didn't get the credit that they deserved, the attribution that they deserved for their own creations. And I just felt like the creative world, on the one hand, is what makes life interesting. Creativity touches everything that we basically engage with, that amuses us, that inspires us. And yet at the same time, the creative industry is probably one of the most disorganized communities on the planet. And it just seemed very frustrating to me. So the idea of Behance was to help organize the creative world at work, to help people get attribution for the work that they do, to help people manage their portfolios in an efficient way where you don't have to know somebody to find their portfolio. You can actually discover their portfolio through a piece of their work that sort of gets featured in some gallery or circulates the internet, but with the proper link back and attribution. And that was the source of the inspiration.
So it's like removing the excuse of, I'm a creative.
Exactly.
No, super cool project. So that's kind of the origin story. And then talk to us, what was the messy middle of Behance? Like, what was the point when you were scared, you're afraid, you're disorganized, you're all over the place trying to figure out which way is up? Talk to us about that moment.
Yeah. Well, as Adam said, we live our lives in the messy middle. And Behance was no exception. Behance was a bootstrapped for 5 years, venture-backed for a little over a year, experience through 2008, which, as we remember, was a very difficult year to have a business. And it was never, not only was there never a dull moment, there were also, what I call the lost years of Behance, where we were kind of going sideways. And we, tried a lot of different things. Some of them totally didn't work. One of them, was really successful. And then a bunch of them were actually in the middle, and those were actually the toughest ones, because they were good enough that they were funding us and they were paying the bills and we couldn't afford to kill them. And yet at the same time, they weren't breakout, high velocity things that would help us change our industry. And those were the difficult ones to kill or optimize so that we could focus on what matters most.
Yeah. And then maybe the closing of that chapter, walk us through the decision to sell to Adobe.
Yeah, I think that when you entertain the opportunity to work with a company or get acquired by a company, you kind of have to go through the calculus of a few different questions. One is this ultimately good for our customers? Is this going to help us achieve our mission? Number 2, is this good for our team in 2 ways, or in the way of is this work we want to continue to do? Are we going to want to actually, is this good for our culture? Or are we just done, and we would just want to get out of here? In our case, we felt like we were still early on in the goals we had, and we wanted to also enjoy, where we would work, and we didn't want to be broken apart as a team. Yeah. And the third was the financial side. We have to make right with our investors, and is this a great financial outcome for the team? Mm-hmm. And in that one, you kind of have to ask yourself, are you going to raise all these subsequent rounds of funding and have more and more dilution? And if that is the case, and you add up more market risk from just like, going for many more years to come, the likely outcome after all that is it ultimately apples to apples to the opportunity you're getting now. And so in each of these instances for us, we felt like this was great for our team. We felt like if we raised much more and went much longer, or had this moment right now, that it was sort of like the same. So that was not a major factor. And then it was about what we wanted to do for the creative world. And we figured it was ultimately about attribution and getting the ability to post your work and get credit for it in the tools themselves that you use to create. And like, what better opportunity than to be part of Adobe? What I did not understand adequately was just how much our team would actually take on new responsibility within Adobe. And one of the unique things about Adobe is it is actually a company made through foreign DNA. A lot of Photoshop was an acquisition that most people forget back in the day. And so, this is a company that loves to bring in new talent and new DNA and sort of say, how would you do this? And give more responsibility. And that part, I think, is what kept us a lot around.
So that's a great segue, actually, Scott. I wanted to ask about, so you're chief product officer at one of the coolest product companies in the world, right? I think everybody has used some tool Adobe has made, and they've managed to stay relevant and bleeding edge for decades. And you just can't say that about any other company. So, what's it like there? Talk to us about your role, like what you're passionate about, kind of how you spend your day there.
Sure. Well, one thing I would say is that one thing that's really cool about Adobe is that a lot of people are there really for the right reasons. Mm-hmm. You can be at a hot, cool company, and then when another cool startup comes or another hot company in Silicon Valley tries to recruit you, you just kind of go there because it's the next cool place to be. And, Adobe's been around for a while. What keeps people there? It's because they're obsessed with photography, or they're obsessed with video, or they're obsessed with some part of the creative world. And that is it's a work that also defines who they are. And when you get to work with people like that, that is in some ways how you sustain an advantage, because these people are so deeply, in love with the problem that they're trying to solve, that they're not going to just kind of like jump to the next, hot, new shiny object in Silicon Valley. And so I think that that is one thing we have going for us as a company that I think people misunderstand or underestimate. I love building products. I love helping change teams and inflect product strategy, and I also love building things for the creative world. And so for me, this is the holy trinity, I guess, of interest, from my career perspective, and that's what's kept me there. The chief product officer role is one that oversees product engineering and design within the organization. So the idea of being able to collapse these different parts of the organization that historically have even fallen under different people in some cases, and bring it all together, immediately you can make sure that a designer is always presenting his or her prototype in the room, as opposed to a product leader or an engineer representing his or her work. You can make sure that in some products you even prioritize design or engineering in preserving this healthy tension for great customer outcomes. A big problem I think Adobe is still cracking away at is having a better user experience across our products. And one way we can achieve that is by bringing all these people together and even redesigning the organization to some degree to build a better experience for customers. And so this is work that is still underway. By no means do I think we're done, and by no means am I completely satisfied with any of our products. I think that's one of the hallmarks of a great product leader, is you're probably never satisfied with your products, but it's a great team, and I really feel lucky to help, make an impact in some way in how the creative world creates.
You touched on this point just a second ago, bringing everybody together. That's hard to do right now. Are you guys moving into like a fully distributed company? Or you have that awesome office down in Townsend I used to walk by every day. Like, what's the latest with that?
Well, we just got a hotel and we all went there. We've been sheltering in place together for 6 months. It's amazing. Our families hate us.
Well done.
No. It's been a great forcing function to think about how our customers have frankly been working already. The creative industry is as you know, very distributed. Some of the best creative talent in the world is overseas in different places. One of the most amazing things I learned through Behance over the years is, 65 or so % of Behance is international, and a lot of the great hot spots for motion graphics work or animation or infographics, there's these little pockets of creative talent all around the world. And for so long have been subjugated by headhunters and agencies and middlemen who basically get in the way and don't even let you know the talent that's doing the work for you as a brand. And it just, it robs so much from the system. And so, first of all, you have to help these people work remotely with companies in order to break through and have a better operating model. The idea, for me, the idea behind a lot of the work we do is creative meritocracy, is somehow empowering the best talent to have the best opportunity. Making sure that match is made, making sure the incentives on both sides derive, that level of collaboration and reward. So part of that is really being empathetic with the modern creative professional and team and how distributed it is. What better forcing function for that empathy than all of us as a company having to work remotely 100%? So that is a silver lining, I guess. Never waste a crisis, and that was one thing I did try to do. Of course, it's been very hard. There's no other way to cut it. It's hard because of families and other afflictions we've had during this period of time with health and social unrest. And there's just it's just so much to manage aside from the day job. But fortunately, I think we're making the most of it.
Yeah, one of the things that I guess drove Adam and I when we were getting started was this core belief that while talent is equally distributed around the world, opportunity is not. And there's essentially people sitting in the middle of those transactions that are running these large arbitrage shops, right? Like finding great talent and then marking them all up and leaving them in the shadows. Like that's I think the wonderful thing that you guys did with Behance was to kind of bring people out of the shadows and bring them onto a global platform where they can show their talents. And that's really, like fundamentally what we were doing here at Braintrust as well, is trying to shine a light on amazing talent that just don't happen to live in Silicon Valley.
It's very rare in the world, especially in innovating within an industry where you can explore a way to make things better. So if you can connect the people that do the work with the people that want the work directly, the outcome is always better. It's, there's no more game of operator, like everyone's sort of aligned and you become passionate about the brand you're working for. It's also cheaper because if you don't have someone in the middle, you can actually, not have to pay as much, and the creative can still make more. So, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's one of those, and it's faster because there's less like sort of, stuff in between, noise. And so we have this opportunity where it's cheaper for the client, the creative makes more, it's better outcome, and it's faster. It's like how can we not change
normally?
How can we not change
normally only get to pick one or two, right? Like better, faster, cheaper. So why, if it is really better, faster, and cheaper, like why have companies been slow to adopt, right? Like what's standing in the way?
Well, it's a good question. First of all, incentives to not change what I just said is part of it. I think that it's also been hard to know where the great talent is, and that information has, for some reason, become like a proprietary thing in the creative industry. And you ask who did some piece of work, and it's an agency. The answer really is it's an agency that agency hired headhunters, that hired talent, in some place in the world to do some amazing work. And so if you can expose that, then you start to collapse the stack. And I think that's also a part of it. And then there's the challenge of managing talent. It's no secret, right, that it's a job to manage a creative process. It's a job to manage talent that's outside the company, to keep it on schedule, to keep it on budget, and that is work. And in some ways, that's been the origin of a lot of the stuff in the middle. So one of the things I loved about Braintrust when I first came across what you were all working on. It was, how to put together, teams that can help kind of solve all of this in a more distributed, empowering, and transparent fashion. I think that was very important to me.
I wanted to touch on a little bit on kind of your views around future work. Like, what are the areas you're most excited about when you think about, what's happening, how work is changing, organizational models might be evolving right now. What are the kind of the areas that are really exciting for you?
Well, I think there are a number of things that are exciting. First of all, I think that in the world of tools, let's just think about the tools that we use to either create or to share information, to analyze data, to manage and optimize, and measure things like in a business. All of these tools used to be for a specific function or a specific person in an organization, and now they're essentially all becoming multiplayer products, where you may get the tool because you have a need, and then the first question, and they're also collaboration first oftentimes, or the first question when you're onboarding is, who else do you work with? And then you name all the different stakeholders of your work, and then those folks are invited to come in and participate. And before you know it, the silos of a traditional function within an enterprise are completely broken down, and people are all having access and working together. And I just think that's a massive trend that impacts the future of enterprise SaaS products, and it impacts the future of what teams even mean and how organizations are modeled and organized, and everything in between.
Really interesting observation there around kind of things all evolving to multiplayer mode.
Yeah.
So outside of the world of tools, maybe like what are you seeing as maybe macro shifts in the way in which organizations are operating or running? And maybe what have you seen accelerated? Obviously distributed work has been accelerated, but maybe any other areas that you've seen accelerated over the past few months as a result of the global pandemic that we've all been enduring?
Yeah, I mean, I have thought about this quite a bit, and the thing I keep coming back to is that as a result of all of the technology that we've brought into our teams over the last 10 years or so and more, there obviously has been a lot more productivity, but there was also a lot of that productivity that was gained but not realized. And what I mean by that is there was a better way for everyone to do something, but there were still some holdouts that got in the way of realizing the last, say, 20% of that productivity gain. And this can be, examples might be, a whole team is on Slack except for the executives. And so everyone still has to go back to email, and they're just like laggards, in adopting the new way of doing things. And if they just stopped cold turkey and just went all in on Slack or Teams or whatever the case may be, then suddenly everyone realizes incrementally more productivity because no one has to do that old, workflow of email. And the same thing goes for meetings that kept happening just because a few people needed them because they were insecure about progress. Other processes that existed only for the holdouts in an organization because they were just the last adopters that were just trailing the curve in an incredibly, ridiculous way. And then suddenly COVID hits, everyone has to work remotely. And suddenly that extra 20% of productivity that was gained but never realized, boom, like the holdouts immediately jump over, they have to. And as a result, imagine like every company on the planet suddenly making up that gained but not realized gap, that productivity gap. So what does that mean? It means good things and bad things. It means, for example, that companies can maybe quickly, help improve their margins in some ways, improve their customer service in some ways. It also might mean that some companies realize they didn't need some of the people that did those processes that should have been antiquated years ago. And that's not good for some people's jobs. So I'm very, there are mixed outcomes as it relates to labor and just the workforce in general. But it's also exciting from a technologist perspective to see people adopt stuff that was always in front of them that they never really cared to use.
It's interesting you mentioned that. We saw something similar with Braintrust when this lockdown started. Prior to COVID, our sales cycle was always sort of like, we'd approach an enterprise and say, look, you've got 300 aging jobs on your job board. You're never going to fill these in-house, right? These people are reluctant to join Adobe or Facebook or Google. They sure ain't going to go work for the bank, right? And so, and you'd say, look, the only way you're going to get these initiatives worked on is with, an outsourced distributed team. And they'd say, like, they kind of nod and be like, yeah, you're right. Like, we don't really love that. We'd rather have butts and seats, but like, we'll dip our toe in, let's try one or two roles. Then the lockdown happens and, everybody comes back to us and says, we can't even get into our offices right now. And now we're 3 months late on this damn thing that we should have been working on the whole time. Can you help us? And so it's exactly as what you're describing, Scott. It's like, they were the laggards, kind of like that old school, I want to see butts in seats pounding away at keyboards, or else it's not real. And this thing just shot ahead 10 years for everybody.
It really has. And I think the implications are, we have no idea how big they are yet. But they're, especially in the new normal, knock on wood, when all this is behind us and people are back to their old ways, they're not old ways anymore, right? They're going to be, there's a tremendous amount they're going to carry with them. And we'll see, how that accelerates other trends.
I mean, what do you think, like, just divergent a little bit here, I like getting people's views on this. What do you think this does for places like New York and San Francisco, where you split your time, where, have typically been strong network effects of creative people, and, we love those cities dearly, but, the world's changed now. Like, what do you think happens to those places?
Yeah, it's a good question. My latest thinking on this is that it doesn't matter as much for people that have already established themselves in their careers and have their networks. In fact, in some ways, it's really sad that those people have an advantage now because they have this established network to continue coasting on. It's really about the next generation. I really worry about the people who are ambitious and young and just graduated college or graduate school, and even if they're getting jobs in all of these different companies, there's no proximity to the leaders. There's no ambient knowledge exchange. There's no being a fly on the wall. There's no taking that risk and speaking up in that meeting or catching that person in the hallway. Or there is, but it's just much harder. And I think that's going to make it really hard for the next generation to break through, to find their career opportunity, to find their window, to distinguish themselves. And that's a concern for all of us, of course, because this is the next generation of talent in our companies. And so when you think about, New York and San Francisco, and what these places, these centers of excellence mean for me as it relates to, my industry and many other industries, it's where that next generation goes out at night and meets their peers. It's where that next generation goes to work every day and meets the boss's boss, and if that's not happening anymore through circumstance and through conferences, and how are they building their networks? And maybe there's creative solutions to that, but it's, I think that's really where the biggest loss and concern would rest for me. For me personally, I love working, remotely and being, having more time with my family and not traveling. And I still feel like I have as much, if not more, productivity than ever before with the people that I've always worked with.
But we all have little kids, and we wouldn't necessarily be at the bars every night anyway. So,
Truth be told, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an argument to make that once the virus is contained and there's a vaccine, and we start to go back to some semblance of normal, that people may value places like San Francisco, Soma, the Village, even more valuable, right? Because it's like, where else are you going to go? We're all so sick of Zoom.
Yeah. And I do think, in a remote world, if we're eventually, even after, especially after COVID, if we're all working remotely, if that's the norm of companies, then I'm really, really long retreat centers, because I think we're going to have these quarterly in real life 3-day experiences where we can all just build those relationships, those networks I'm talking about, and also have that circumstantial stuff that, generates breakthroughs.
Yep. Yeah.
For sure. So, Scott, switching gears a little bit, you are a man of many different endeavors and a prolific investor. So, I mean, you've been an operator, you're now an executive at a massive company, and you've spent a lot of time investing. I know you spent time at Benchmark, and you're a really active angel. First of all, how do you split your time up? Like, how do you prioritize things? And then we'd love to get into sort of investment theses.
Yeah, I used to be a real big scheduler and very cognizant of how much time I was spending on each thing and with each person in my life. And then I realized, there has to be some form of natural selection, to help me be able to focus on the things that matter most to me, as opposed to like artificially constrain myself based on what I think it should be, analytically. And that being said, though, I do try to save a few hours on Fridays to connect with teams that I am working with. I am trying to make myself available for those crucial decisions and moments in an entrepreneur's journey where I think I can be helpful. And oftentimes those are like midnight phone calls or things like that, where something big's about to happen, and you need to ask a few people you can trust, to help you get through it. And certainly people did that for me. I mean, Chris Dixon, now an investor at Andreessen, who was an angel investor of mine in New York. He was on the phone with me at 12 or 1 a.m. the nights leading up to my acquisition, helping me rethink the cap chart, making sure my team got taken care of, and helping me understand what I was even allowed to do to really do the right thing. And I owe him immensely for that. So I try to do that for my companies. And the way I always think about how you spend your time is, at least for me, happiness means feeling fully utilized. And that translates to what I can do for my family and my friends. It means what I can do for and learn from the teams that I work with. And it means what I can do with product teams that I manage and a strategy that I'm helping build at Adobe. And it's, and some people say, well, do you think you should only be doing one thing, or do you feel too tight or whatever? And if any of these muscles aren't being used, I'm sometimes resentful of that. So I want to be fully utilized in that way. And I'm sure that will change, as I age and priorities change, but that's where I am right now. And I think that everything helps each other, right? Like I think a chat with a startup team and learning about the design tools that they're using, and then being in a review of a design tool the next day, it's like I can start connecting dots. And I think that helps me in both sides of the work that I do.
And maybe can you talk a little bit about kind of your thesis or the area that you typically focus on when you're making investments?
Yeah, I don't have one particular thesis, but there are always threads that I'm pulling. And it seems like, as I pull a thread, I try to share it, on social, in Twitter and with friends and catch up calls. And when you share proactively the things that you're thinking about, the world starts to connect the dots for you. People start to respond and share another article, or they suggest you talk to so-and-so. And, these sorts of dots end up connecting oftentimes to either nothing or to, a new investment or a new view, on the world, and the way, something that's broken that should be fixed. And so I try to do that as much as possible. And there are a few, though, cardinal things that are consistent for me. One is the role of design and interfaces and disintermediating a lot of the underlying services or a lot of the old ways that things were done. I also love technology that's empowering to people and that's correcting something where people once were taken advantage of and now they're liberated in some way, shape, or form. I just think that that's one of the best uses of technology, and specifically marketplaces and professional products. And so I love causes like that. And I love working with teams that really, more than being passionate about a solution to a problem in the world, really seek empathy with the customer suffering the problem. I actually think that a lot of entrepreneurs go sideways and build a product that's 30 degrees off of product market fit by pursuing a passion for a solution relentlessly, and then realizing, wait a second, actually, this is not, hammer on the head of the nail of the problem. And so I think that the litmus test for that is whether people have empathy, and how do they express that, and how do they govern their product decisions based on it.
I'd be curious to get your take. I would say more classically, it seems like a lot of the stuff you've been investing is consumer, right? Consumer facing. Maybe that's not 100% accurate, but I always think of you as like really great consumer chops and also like, a lens and a focus on things that are design related. So like, why invest in blockchain? Like, do you like see, maybe you could share some of like what you believe the possibilities of this new technology to be?
Yeah, I'm no blockchain expert. I think it's an interesting underlying technology that you can use for specific purposes. And so for me, I didn't go out and say I'm going to be a blockchain investor and try to find the blockchain solution to everything. Instead, I like to kind of go back to the principle of what's broken about a marketplace, in your case, or what's broken about the way that people transact, or the lack of anonymity, or what's broken about something, and then what novel solution really 10x improves the way that something works. And that's really interesting to me. And if blockchain happens to be part of the answer there, that's great. But I was never, I've never gone out and looked proactively for blockchain investments.
Got it.
So Scott, I got to ask that you've got a star-studded portfolio. And so now, so I won't feel bad asking you, what's your anti-portfolio?
Oh man, there are quite a few. I met with Ivan, the founder of Notion, when he was first building his product as a seed, in the seed stage. And I just, I didn't see it didn't all connect for me. And then I ended up having the opportunity to participate in one of his later rounds. And I just felt like I was paying the price for not seeing the vision. That was certainly a regret. And, there are a number of others that, over the years, just, just didn't see it fully. But I do try to beat myself up a little bit because I want to learn from them. But at the same time, there's just a lot of luck. And listen, I'm not a full-time investor. I can't take every pitch in every meeting. I try to follow my heart with what's deeply interesting to me and intriguing as a bellwether, if you will. But you can only do what you have time to do.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned beating yourself up. Like I do the same thing. I'm also not a full-time investor, but the big ones I've missed, I try to be rigorous about like, would I've missed it again? And the one that always like haunts me, especially now, is I got to see Brian Chesky pitch the seed round in 2010 or no, sorry, 2008. That's what he's, yeah. There was this thing called Summit Series, and they did their first one in DC. Have you ever been to Summit?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so they did their first one in DC, I think, or it was maybe the second one. The first one was in the mountains, and I saw Chesky pitch, and I remember thinking like, someone sleeping on my couch, like what a great way to be murdered. Like this, and I was like, this guy's not even a tech guy. He went to RISD. How is he getting, I was like so stupid and arrogant and, just missed a monster right there.
Well, it's interesting, right? That innovation ultimately is about seeing an edge that will someday become the center. And the weird thing about edges is that they're always going to look strange and they're always going to feel unfamiliar, right? So how do we socialize ourselves with something that is at the edge, that is unfamiliar and therefore foreign and uncomfortable and whatever? I mean, to me, it's about rounding yourself off with people that are completely different than you, which is a case obviously when you're building your team. Making sure you have a real diverse team and people from different places and different backgrounds, and that you really deeply respect, because then you're stacking the odds in your favor of someone that you work with getting fascinated by some edge. And at first you're like, that's weird. But then you realize, you have so much respect for them that you really want to dig in and understand, why is this interesting to that person? And that period of socialization of, you appreciating something that's foreign to you that seems strange or potentially murderous, maybe that's the reason why we can make those investments. I don't know.
I love that quote, like seeing the edge that will become the center. It just really, it struck a chord for me because, Adam and I, it's not our first time at the rodeo in terms of building companies here in Silicon Valley. And like when we took out this idea for Braintrust and took it down Sand Hill and did 110 meetings total. And listen, like we're describing this thing, this idea that like the future of marketplaces will be owned by the users rather than the investors and the operators. And rather than extract a maximum fee, we want to take fees to zero. And people like laughed us out of the office, right? Like people said, like we would invest in anything you guys want to do. If you want to do like women's insoles for shoes, like we'll write you a check right now, but just don't do this. Because it just sounded crazy, right? Like to totally invert the way in which marketplaces have been operated. Yet like when we met with you, we were 5 minutes in and you're like, I get this, I'm in. And so like, listen, don't ever lose sight of that. It has served you well. And I think it's also just great wisdom for other early stage investors because the new things don't look like the old things.
No, they don't. And I think you have to ask yourself, if every player, if every customer or participant of some new idea or technology would be happy, with what that offers, especially if they're 5x plus happy with what it offers. Like, for example, not getting the 30% cut taken out of every paycheck you get, that's pretty damn happy. Then we got to, you got to dig in and explore it. Like that's fascinating. That's how models are transformed. I think that's a very critical, thread of innovation.
Well, we're going to transition to something we call the lightning round, and then we know obviously you've got a ton on your plate, so we want to be conscious of your time. But let's transition into this lightning round, and the idea here is just like free form, kind of one sentence, quick responses. So the first one would be, what have you learned about yourself during shelter in place?
Well, I learned the importance of regular physical fitness. Honestly, I have tried to fit it in throughout my life. I've never really valued it enough. And when this whole thing started and I felt so cooped up, I was like, okay, I'm going to run every other day, like rain or shine. And that made a big impact for me in my life. That's one lesson. There you go. There are many more, but
that's a great one. Yeah. Scott, what's the coolest thing Adobe's doing right now that nobody knows about?
We are planting the seeds for the future of 3D and immersive as a new creative medium. And if you think about Adobe historically helped graphic designers adopt the web, make the move from print to the web, and then helped web designers start thinking about mobile. And now it's like, okay, what's next? I do believe that the 3D and immersive world where everything is animated and interactive and hyper-personalized and this augmented reality existence we may live in changes the game yet again. And everyone's going to have to be able to go to that new medium of creativity. And Adobe is patiently laying a lot of the seeds for what will be required there. And of course, people don't really care right now because it's not top of mind, but it will be.
That's awesome. Wow. I actually can't wait to see that.
Me too.
So this is big if. If you were to write another book, what would the title be?
Ooh, I like the idea of I'll call it material messages, and the idea is especially during this whole period of COVID shelter in place, and also the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, and a lot of these opportunities for organizations to improve and address the most important issues of our time. Every leader is struggling with how to communicate, how to make sure that you help others communicate, how to send the message clear, how to change the way people are thinking. And it comes down to messages. It comes down to things you say in town halls and groups. It comes down to emails you send, and it comes down to text messages, and it comes down to messages. And so it'd be interesting when you're trying to save your company because you're in the travel industry and your whole, world just went to zero, or in any company that's enduring these difficult times, the messy middle, the messages that matter are really interesting. So how about a book called Material Messages that just basically collects and collates all these great messages for us to learn?
I think you're going to be getting hit up after this podcast goes live by HarperCollins or anyone else.
I mean, it's funny. You seem like the kind of guy that, like, if it's all you did, you'd probably churn 3 books a year and they'd all be bestsellers. Like,
I don't know about.
Probably not the best.
When I write a book, I'm like, never again. This is painful. So I'm still in that period right now, but we'll see.
I bet. All right, next up, Scott, if you could fast forward any specific business, you don't necessarily have to name it, but the function of the business, by 5 years, what would it be and why?
I can fast forward any business.
Yeah.
I might cheat and give a similar answer around 3D and immersive. I'm really excited about, I feel like screens could someday become like record players.
Yeah.
Where, either our children or our children's children will be like, what's that thing in the attic? Like, what the heck is that thing? It's like, oh, that's a screen. And they'll be like, screen? Like, why would, I have massive 50-foot screens in front of me wherever I go at all times if I want them. Why would you ever buy some clunky piece of hardware? I think that if I could accelerate this adoption of augmented reality, I think it would really change things in a pretty profound way. And I actually think it's going to be, I would dare say, a better world, because I think we're going to really be able to turn on and turn off what we want to see, where we want to see it, and I think it could add value. We'll never, we'll never be out of information again when we need it.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a fantastic conversation. We really, really enjoyed having you on today. And also thank you for being an early and huge supporter of what we're building at Braintrust. I mean, you saw it right away. You were in, and you've been such a huge supporter. I couldn't recommend you as an investor high enough. And just thank you for all the support along the way as we take, in your words, as we take the edge and turn it towards the center.
Well,
where can people find out? Yeah, where can people find out a little bit more about you? Follow you on the socials.
Just at Scott Belsky. I kept it simple. Twitter or Instagram. Feel free to reach out. Anything that anyone is wants me to weigh in on or connect on. Feel free to reach out.
It's fantastic.